models you can look at. The model already exists on this literal CD drive. It exists on this server, and we're supporting a yet undesigned one. Please build that system and design it for us now. And we did. How? By building the object models, focusing on the responsibilities, and implementing them literally in a very specific way that, by the way, object-oriented calls inheritance, or in our language here, is a kind of. So we ended up building objects using an is a kind of relationship to talk to 3 different data. I can build a complete object architecture without ever knowing where or how the data is stored. It's really powerful when you're doing software development. That doesn't mean you don't have to answer that question when you finally build the software. You still have to answer it. It's still a big project. So we made an object diagram. We explained it to somebody else. And this is going to be our key. And we're going to ask you to do some more. We're going to change our request for you when you explain. Explain it to someone in the room you don't know the next time we build one. It may involve getting up and walking around. It's always more interesting explaining to somebody you don't know. Your friends will like pretend they understand things. So technically people are objects, or we could treat them as stuff, but it turns out that we might also want to think about people as people. And so when we're talking about the physical thing of the objects or the things, we can also draw the who with a little stick figure. How many people have seen a stick figure like this? Yes, like everywhere. And in the unified modeling language, this is called an actor. An actor is somebody who's acting on, with, or in the system. And the actor is usually described with a role. So when I'm interviewing somebody or observing, going through a place and observing, there's 2 types of observing. One where you do a quick tour. My favorite type of observing is where you sit there for like 3 days and you really watch how they work. Either case, you start recording the actors. You draw them in your notes when you see them, and you capture their roles. So an actor that exists in any big, say, company is national manager. There'll be someone in that company who has that title. And the national manager, wherever you work, will always have some sort of relationship with the regional manager. Don't know what that relationship is, but that same line I can use for people that I was using for things. I can even use the has a relationship if I want. A national manager has a regional manager, or in this case, I've captured it with supports. I might think of this as reports to. In this case, a national manager has one to some unlimited number, hopefully not unlimited, probably about 9, they would freak out. Regional managers. I can also use the is a kind of relationship when I'm talking about people. And you'll see this in the diagrams that were handed around, right? A medical manager is a kind of nurse. By the way, this in the one case turned out to be really interesting. There were a whole bunch of separately called out roles in that one client we were working with, where when you're like, wait a minute, they're all nurses. That's sort of really interesting information. So like that information makes it onto the diagram because one, it catches you a little by surprise. Oh, all of these roles with all of these different names, their fundamental qualification is they're a nurse. And you can also, and we talked briefly about putting an annotation on a relationship. I can do this at any time. I just dropped it into the notes here. So anytime I have a relationship and I want to call out something interesting, this, by the way, you may want to put in your key on your last page. I can just draw a little box, write some text in it, point to the relationship. And in this case, I'm annotating a relationship between treatment provider and treatments. And in the case, and I recognize this because I was actually looking at the diagrams, the case that was interesting to me when I built the diagrams was an annotation of speedo. So what does this mean? It turns out we were really interested in how quickly a treatment provider could do a set of treatments. The treatment providers were trained on all sorts of different equipment, and like anything else, some people do it fast, and some people do it slower, and some people do it really slow. And the people who are doing it fast have likely been doing it longer, or maybe just have, you know, a higher caffeine intake, whatever it is. They can normally get somebody through in 20 minutes, and the typical provider takes 30, and some of them take 40. And it turns out you want to know this when you're trying to schedule your rooms and your equipment. Who's actually going to be doing that treatment, because it will take a different amount of time. So you put it as an annotation. And again, because you want to remember, because it's an interesting thing to remember about that relationship. You might also see here that we've connected with a has a relationship, a treatment provider, to an object, a treatment. And one treatment provider has one or some unknown number of treatments, at least one, or they wouldn't be there. They have to get certified and trained, and in some places maybe have a license to do something. There's one other notation that it's really meant to be more meaningful to software developers, but I occasionally shove it into my notations when I'm working with other folks. And it's coloring in the diamond. And when I color in the diamond in the cases on the things that were handed out to you, I was generally trying to capture some sort of stronger or tighter relationship. So I think I used it mostly when I was talking about relationships between people. If you were the person who fired your person, I colored in your diagram. Your diamond, you have the real authority is to you. You have the hire or fire decision. But it's my way of saying there's a tighter connection here. And you would have to remember what that is, or put it in an annotation, or not use it if you didn't really care. In software architecture, we often we fill in that diamond when the one piece of software is literally going to be responsible for disposing of the other piece of software, for creating it and disposing of it. Turns out when you write software, cleaning up after yourself is a big deal, or at least it used to be. Now people just fill up your memory until your computer crashes. And the last thing is these can all become mixed, right? So here's a national manager supports a regional manager who has a staff plan, and the regional manager is a kind of nurse. And so these little elements of vocabulary that capture, describe relationships, you can begin to build up in the way that makes sense to you to describe the thing you're working on.
What's going on with the interruption in the line?
Which interruption?
Well, it looks like because you're...
It's actually 2 lines, yeah. So this line is a diamond on the end, so national manager supports regional manager. This is actually is a kind of relationship pointing in the other direction. By the way, I did have it off at one point, but I anticipated subconsciously your question.
Well, I was seeing the arms of the little stick person as a contiguous line between national manager and nurse.
Semaphore.
That got interrupted itself.
No.
And I was seeing it.
So we have people, we have who, we have objects, we have things. The other thing that is really interesting is actions. And actions in the unified modeling language were described with ovals, or are described with ovals. They're often called a use case. And the title of the use case is put inside of the oval. Remember when I described those requirements documents that were like this thick, and you drop them on the floor and you hear a noise? So the fun thing was, someone might hand you one of these requirements documents, and like, Tom, read this. We're going to bid on this project. That's always fun. And you're in that document about 70 pages, and you suddenly realize, I have no idea what this thing is, or what it's doing, or why they're building it, or like any contextual information. It just is a list of features. The system shall, when you press the red button, add 4 to the vertical semaphore. And you're like, I don't understand anything you just said. And you're 50 pages in, and you've read that like 500 times. That's why I'm a fan of use cases. So a use case might be like, hey, I'm going to take and record vital signs. Well, what makes this more interesting is who's going to take and record the vital signs. And now we capture a nurse with a relationship to take and record vital signs. We might build that out. I actually do multiple things. I take and record vital signs. I administer a vaccination. I collect bodily fluids. Some of these might be more fun than others. Let's move to something more fun. Hey, it's a student portal. I have a student. I capture the portal inside of this nice rectangle boundary. That's my system. What am I going to do? I'm going to review my course schedule. I'm going to schedule a job interview. I'm going to update my profile. And this just becomes a way. It's really nice if somebody has done this, and maybe you have a half a dozen or a dozen of these people, and you see 10 or 15 of these things that they do, and you can look at it on 2 or 3 pages, and you're like, oh, that's what I'm building, basically. Even if it doesn't capture everything, you have context after 2 or 3 diagrams for what it is that you're talking about. It is so much nicer than the giant requirements doc with no context. Make sense? People built or seen something like this before? No? Yes? No? All right. Oh, wow. These are really handy. It's incredibly handy. Sometimes we do an includes relationship. Add this to your key. By the way, if you didn't add use case to your key, that should have been added to your key. The oval with the title inside. Action A includes action B. There are other things that they did for software that I like almost never do. So I'm not going to show them to you. So take and record vital signs includes take and record blood pressure. The reason I likely pulled out take and record blood pressure and captured it separately is because sometimes that's all that you do. So it's like sometimes you're like, just take the blood pressure. I'm like, all right, that's easy. Do you ever just take the blood pressure and not do all the other work? Yes. All right. Whereas, and take and record blood pressure in this case might be one of 3 things that gets included inside of take and record vital signs. I don't necessarily have to capture all the details on the diagram. In fact, generally I don't. I want that high category label to just remember, oh, here's a nurse and here's the big things they're doing inside of the system. There are a lot of ways when people get deeper into software where they sometimes write out details. For a long time, people were, not a long time, for a short period of time, people were writing out lots of details for a use case. Just line after line after line after line after line of everything that could go wrong in one way or the other. And then they realized they were spending too much time writing documentation. Pull back. It's really powerful just to see the people in the title of the use cases as a summary of the system that you're talking about.
What's the difference between includes and has?
It's actually the same. And I almost, for the class, just put has on because it would be so much nicer. Because it's like, and then it's like, yeah, but if you actually bought the book, you'll see that they did it this way. But for our purposes, has would work perfectly fine here. It's probably a better choice just for simplifying the vocabulary of the notation. So I was building a student portal, and I at some point wanted to apply tags to content. This is just looking at a little piece of a student portal, but just a little piece of it. But you suddenly realize, wow, actually just the idea of tagging things could potentially be fairly complicated. And I could apply tags, I could do finding tags, selecting tags, I could propose tags, maybe I add that. I can't just make a tag, but I can propose one if I don't find one that I wanted for content. This is an editor on the other side. We have here librarian. They create, update, and delete tags. They add tags to collections, add tag translation. Oh, maybe I want to support the 5 languages that could be, right? On the University of Michigan, how many languages are spoken here? 100, probably, at the university. I want to search only on English, or I want to include other languages. I want to approve tags. I can put tags in the collection, so I have a librarian who approves collections. And I suddenly realized this thing that got thrown out in a meeting as, let's add tagging to our system, actually opens up a whole lot of things to potentially contemplate and understand. Even if you pick a tool that says I have tagging, you might still want to have this conversation because you might not understand what the tool does and whether or not what it does is actually sufficient for what you want to understand and need. And so you build it out. This is like so much painful to think about how many features could get burst out into this level of detail that get passed over in a meeting as, oh, that will be easy. There's nothing you have to design for that. We've never heard that. So I'm going to ask you now to spend the next 3 or 4 minutes to make a use case diagram. In this case, now in something that you're actually maybe working on. So who are they?
They don't quite know yet.
We don't know yet? In that case, pick anything that you find as an interesting system. So, by the system that you interact with, who are the people and what are the things that they are doing inside of that system? Try to capture at least 2 or 3 people and 2 or 3 things they are doing. And feel free to work in pairs when you're doing this. Pick your system and capture a use case diagram. Who are the actors? What are they doing? What are the use cases? What are some of their types?
How about the?
If you can't think of anything, you can do this class.
So there's somebody. Everything he's doing also
Every task is right. So we're using it. So there's now they're Yeah, there's no, I think that's the way of the reality. So this is like promoting the event. So that's what it's saying. So when they they're managing all the day. They're lightweight.
Tom, I assume all of your retirement money is at this point?
Is it? Well, it's gone up a bit. What is it at?
I don't know.
Okay. What's a use case diagram in somebody else? Anybody want to call one out for us? Who wants to volunteer? I know you all like are working. Name an actor in your use case diagram.
Oh, so I'm gonna try a use case diagram for one of my jobs.
Okay.
So there was, the student archivist and then the team leader, which is me. And so I was
Student
trying to.
archivist is one, team leader is
Team
another.
leader is another. So I was trying to parse out sort of the actions they're doing and then also sort of how my team leader, like my actions relate to that in terms of we're cataloging and metadata, so.
Right. So what's an action you have for a student archivist?
Like create XML file.
Create XML file.
Yeah, and like listen, like some of it's listening to recordings and doing metadata, so like listening to audio recording and then off of that, like creating different categories of metadata.
So listening to auto. So what should be inspired if you were to start here, which you partially did, because we were just doing objects and things around the room. When you start doing this, you should be immediately going, oh, there's probably a whole object diagram I'd like to build now, capturing the things and how these folks relate to each other. it's very likely when you just start, like what you're doing for the pre-screen minutes, will just begin to inspire a bunch of things. So you begin to write it down. And you'll literally bounce back and forth between the 2 or 3 different diagrams as whatever you're working on inspires you to, capture 3 more objects. What do I want to call this? I want to call this media. All right, what are the types of media? 3. All right, then you go back. What was I doing again over here? And like, maybe I'll use media now as that word instead of the more specific word that I started with.
Is that could that be and I hate this current phrase, rule of thumb for doing either of these, that if you were interested in the use case modeling, that you would want to have things relate to thing open at the same time or vice versa?
Yeah.
Is that how you do it?
In general, so when I do it, and I've been using a tool for a lot of the stuff I've been doing with Tug, I've been using Draw.io, which is just an online, like, free tool for doing this. That, by the way, it's like occasionally messes up arrowheads when you close and open it, which is slightly annoying. Which is why when we were doing one more recently, I just purchased my Visio or some other stupid tool. But I like Draw.io because it sort of was this endless space. So all of those diagrams that you handed out are all in one file. I could just scroll left and right, and like as I was working on something, I'm like, I'm gonna cut that over there as well. So for me, it's very natural. The meditation for me is very much connected to these other things. And I'll get focused on a little area for a while, while I'm reading my notes or listening to interviews or whatever, or looking at the pictures that I took. And I'll bounce between all of it. And some, I was talking about a student who was as the exercise was doing dentists. And as you meditate for a while on this, you just begin to think this way. Can you imagine? I walk in, what's the first thing I see in a dentist office?
Magazines.
Magazines, write it down. I see the receptionist, but where your focus is.
I'm a librarian.
Architectural digest. I see the receptionist, great. What are 2 or 3 things that the receptionist does? Well, they check you in and they escort you back. And you give them payment information at the end. And you schedule your next visit. 1, 2, 3, 4. Boom. So you can do a first pass at these things when you've gotten in the habit of meditating on them fairly quickly. Who else do I bump into? The hygienist. What does the hygienist do? Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And very quickly, for me, just because I've done this for decades, it's like I can build out this rough model in about 10 minutes. Then I spend forever meditating on it. Then I go, and I like to build models even sometimes before I meet people. It's like, if they give me a requirements document, great, I start reading it. Guess the type of word I underline or maybe highlight with like a blue marker. Let's go through the first page and highlight in the blue marker the nouns. That's interesting. Do that on the second page. Do that on the third page. Am I finding new nouns or interesting nouns? No. All right, I'll stop. I can actually, just from them handing me a requirements document, begin to build an object model. When I'm reading it, if I'm lucky, I can see some of the actors and I can see some of the activities. And I can pull those just from the documentation they hand me on their I can begin to build a model. Then I go in to talk to them. I don't even show them what I've drawn. That was just me priming the pump for what I'm going to hear from them when I start to talk. And in all of the projects we've done together, for the most part, I've done that. Right? I go off and I build 2 or 3 just from whatever artifacts Tug sends my way.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the meditation time is built at the same rate as generation time.
Yeah. It's the same rate all the way around.
It might take you 10 minutes to get the squiggles down.
So I have technically.
That's not a 10-minute job that we will find 10 minutes for.
Right. No, it's the whole time you spend thinking about it. Technically, if you want to get into building, when you get really good at this stuff, you don't actually want to build time and materials. You want to build for the deliverable because you can do it still dramatically faster. And they should be paying for your ability to conceptualize something fast. So with most of my clients, other than Tug, I work with Tug because they're fun. Okay? There's not many people you can have this style of conversation with. Even though, like, everyone you should be able to have this style of conversation with. So yes, so you should naturally be bouncing back and forth between several of these diagrams that are open. If you're billing for your time or you're working, the fact that you have a diagram and you're now thinking about it and moving things around and changing a few small labels is important time. It's important that you think about putting as good a name as you can in front of somebody. And if you're putting it in front of the marketing group, you want to use computer. Even though that's what it is, by the way.
You might want to promote something. You may not want it to sail off through unnoticed.
Any questions on what we've covered so far in terms of the object diagrams, the is a kinda, the has a? So I'm hoping for a bunch of you, there's at least two things going on in your head. One is, gee, this seems fairly straightforward, Tom, which is good. And the other is, you need nobody does this? It's like, for the most part, nobody does this. You're like, the next question might be, well, how do they understand what they're working on?
Well, one little quick one. A student did come up to me in one of the breaks and noted that Carl Lugosi, who used to teach knowledge management, organization knowledge, did teach this a little bit.
Yeah. Good.
But I think by and large, the characterization, 1 out of 50, I think you said earlier, of clients who would have
Yeah. You would actually have an architecture.
adequate diagrams to support the kinds of conversation that need to happen, I would put the ratio would be even worse. In my experience. 1 in 100.
And people wonder, so I consult a lot on software development process and methodology, and I work with very big clients all over the country. It's more fun to work with small people locally, or smaller projects locally. I know it's big, but it's like, it's nice. It's actually still well contained. Because it's really hard when no one understands what they're working on for them to make great profits. There's a reason the company spends $1.5 billion a year on software. You're like, wait, you are really still just writing and adjudicating policies, right? So when the big companies get really successful, they can afford to spend a lot of money on software. That's both good and bad for the industry. I would prefer they get more efficient at it, just because otherwise I get bored. So the skills that we talked about in this class, my way of saying, as simple as these skills are, these are really valuable skills. The ability to go in, and there's more to these skills, the ability to go into the group, to be able to spend time observing, to be able to interview people and ask questions. What do you do? Why do you do it that way? And to capture that in a way that you can reflect back to them that they find meaningful and insightful and helpful is a really valuable skill. But the notation itself for doing that doesn't need to be complex. In fact, the complexity likely gets in the way. So we made that, we explained, right? To me as a methodologist, when I have a use case diagram, I have this ability now when I'm talking about a system to a group, right? To understand that, oh, I'm talking about it in a way that's actually meaningful to the people using it. By the way, a great way to build a use case diagram, if you're ever called in as a lone core information architect to a group of people, and they want to build a new system or a new version of a system, you literally just find a whiteboard and you get a marker. You're like, all right, what is the system? And I'll give you the name. I did this at the law school once. It's like the registrar system. It wasn't that, it was the system for putting kids in the class. And you're like, who's one of the people who uses it? You draw the stick figure. Give me a category, they'll give you a name, student. And then you're like, great, what's one of the things they're gonna do with it? And you just build it in front of them in real time. And I was at, years ago, I was over at the law school, I was up in a room with the chalkboards, they had like 15 or 20 people in the room, and we just did this for like 2 hours. And each people coming along and adding, all right, who else are we building for, right? But as soon as they run out, it's like, all right, who else? And I had, as an employee who was working at the law school, while I'm drawing on the board, he's keeping a set of notes down to have a good record for the meeting. And we spent 2 hours doing this, and at the end, all of the stakeholders like, that's the best meeting we've ever had about the system. And they could see it all the way across the chalkboard at the end of the 2 hours. Incredibly powerful way to facilitate a meeting when you're discussing a system. And you look magical, because you are magical. What you're doing is magic for them. You're creating understanding where there wasn't understanding. Usually when I look at these use cases, for me as a methodologist, right, I'm looking to understand the context from the user. When I look at the use cases, I'm often looking for them to be able to be implemented independently. I can implement some parts of this tagging system and not others. That's really important to me as a software methodologist, because what we used to do with that 300-page document was like write down every last thing we could think of and say, that's the spec, now just deliver it all. We pump it on the desk. The problem is all of these use cases aren't created equal. Some of them are infinitely more valuable than others. When I put them all in one document and drop them on your desk, I'm treating the one that maybe adds 1% of the value and the equivalent to one that's going to add 30 or 40% of the value. That's a really silly way to go about implementing a system. We want to look for the ways that are going to add more value. Agile calls what it likes to work on user stories. A user story is literally like, as an editor, I want to apply a tag, we'll add one more thing. So that, what was the benefit for me applying the tag? And you ask you to start that out, and that becomes the basis of an Agile user story. An Agile user story is meant to be independent, so that I can prioritize them in different orders to hunt for the most valuable things to build. In Agile, the biggest win in Agile for most of my bigger corporate clients is the 150 pages of that 300 documents we finally decided never to implement because it was just a bad idea. It's like a bunch of people in a meeting all yelled out their favorite feature, and somebody wrote that down, and that became the spec. That's a horrible way to build a spec. Right? Build this, discuss it, discuss what's valuable, what's more valuable, what's less valuable. How much it's going to cost potentially to build these, even just an order of magnitude estimate from the development team. This is a 1, this is 100. I don't even know the need to know the units. That's 100 times bigger. If it's not adding 100 times as much value, maybe I don't want to do it. And so to me, that's a really powerful thing about this style of modeling, is that it's directly applicable to my projects as I begin to move forward. So one last thing I want to cover before we're done for the day, because we're done at 4, right? We're done at 4. And so when we created Menlo, we'd already been experimenting with high-tech anthropology. This idea of not only do we were big fans of reading The Inmates Are Running the Asylum, and the accusation in that book was you shouldn't leave software design, user interaction design to software developers because they're generous in their selfishness. And a software developer, often an engineer, will give you a lot of what they like. And what they like are infinite choices. Doesn't everyone like infinite choices? Well, I give you one button when I can give you 50 parameters to set up. And so they're like, maybe we want to build teams focused on users and focused on understanding users and focused on maybe optimizing how work flows through the system and how the user gets work done. And when we began to explore that, it was about 20 years ago, before we found it, we're like, wow, it actually really works. And there's a project that, one of the more famous projects that, in terms of my head, that we did, is a longer project, but we built a something called a flow cytometer that sits on somebody's desk. There's a long project spun in part out of the University of Michigan, and we spent $7 million on it. And another company, unbeknownst to us, with infinite budget, and spent $70 million. And the two went to market about the same time. We were taking something that had been a big old system, and it was $500,000, about the size of a refrigerator. We were reducing it to like a desktop printer at about $50,000. It's used in universities for research. When the two went to market around the same time, we killed them. Why did we kill them? Oh, because we built a system with users in mind. We actually continually worked with the researchers to make sure it was easier and easier and easier to use, as opposed to giving them a lot of what we as programmers might like. We hired people like you to be high-tech anthropologists to actually find out the relationship people wanted with their technology. The reason I know that story, we spent $7 million and the other team spent $70 million, is because they ultimately bought our technology for $200 million. I didn't, unfortunately, I'd already told them I had no stake in this, unfortunately. Which means really, we spent $7 million and they spent $270 million to get the same results. And the difference is people like you. Literally, the difference is people like you who bothered to learn about information architecture, who bothered to learn about how to think about systems, who bothered to learn about how to think about ways to construct things better. Right? If I'm going to make it good, I need to know what good means. And if you ask the software developer, we have our very own unique definition. Good might be exceptionally fun technology to work with. So one last diagram I want to cover, you just cover briefly, you can look it up. I want to cover it mainly to show you what my high-tech anthropologists most liked about it. So when we first started doing this, when we first started building out the high-tech anthropology teams, they all bought UML distilled. It was like their little Bible. They would take it around with them and build use case diagrams and build more activity diagrams than even object models. And that's what we're going to talk about. And it is a relatively small number of elements. This is your chance to write them down in your key. Right now, you can also Google activity diagram.
I've already put your slides on the course file share. Is that okay?
No, don't make it easier for them. That's okay to share, but I still want to write it down.
Okay.
Start, end, transition, action, decision, fork, and join. We'll talk specifically about these. I just like them practicing writing them once.
Yeah.
My expectation was.
But no terror if you miss it. You can come back to it.
And we'll hit what they most like about this in a moment. So here's an example activity diagram. And we have the start dot, is a little solid dot in the transition. And they're taking an order. And then that line that's called a fork, we introduced computer language in here. You might recognize it. That means we're going to do everything on the left here and everything on the right. I could have more items in the fork if I wanted to. I don't care the order they're going to be done, but before I can move on, they all have to be done. So when I took the order, someone's off preparing food, someone else is collecting money and providing change, maybe the same person, maybe not. I don't care the order that both of these columns are done, but both columns have to be done before we can move on. And after we've done both, we deliver the order, and then we hit the end dot. And so, as opposed to a lot of other diagrams up before this was introduced, we're sort of focused on the flow charts, like the flow of knowledge or information or decisions in a system. They're powerful diagrams. They're worth learning, but this is really focused on the people and their activities, which is a very different way of sort of thinking about the system. That decision point would be something that would come in like this. It's just a diagram. It's like I deliver the order, they hit a decision point, and then like, were there problems? Right? Ask what they need, and then deliver the order again. No problems, go on. All good. So a very simple how are we interacting with the folks. And the next piece to this diagram I'm going to show you, so this should all be pretty simple. The value is really in looking at the people and how they're playing with the things. It's the idea of what are the activities that they are doing. That's very powerful from an analysis point of view of trying to understand. But when I was working at a giant insurance company and we were looking at like how a claim gets processed, it was a diagram like this that we put up over the whole wall and invited people to come in, and we maybe broke it into phases. But it's like, this is like all we're doing, right? Even though we have infinite amount of people apparently to do it. This is all we're doing. And there's one thing we add, which is the next slide, called swim lanes. That is what my analysts seem to most love about drawing in this diagram. And swim lanes is where they connected a person to, like, so the order taker is that top section of the graph, and the swim lanes are those two thin little black lines. And so when I'm looking down a process, and we don't see it here, but often things will flow up and down as they go back and forth between different people or different departments and different responsibilities. And this diagram showing here, the order taker takes the order. They also, in this organization, collect the money and provide the change. The kitchen, someplace else, is preparing the food. And a deliverer kind of takes the prepared food and delivers the order. And so it's seeing who is responsible for what activities and seeing it in context and seeing some of the decision points that may cross these that our hydrogen anthropologists guessed a lot. And so they tended to build these styles of diagram to facilitate conversations around the activities that people are actually involved in. Make sense? Any of the notation in here? Any questions about it? You're very quiet.
Have you all been shown how to do task analysis? And for those notepads that are nodding, it's not too dissimilar from you do diamonds for decision points and then fork out if yes, then over here, and no, then down there. I'm not seeing a ton of those. Oh. Do you have any sense of differences or if they exist between?
I think they're overlapping a lot. So where does this come from? Potentially could be triggered entirely by a use case, and someone's then looking at the use case and going, what were all the activities and tasks involved in this use case, and they blow that out into an activity diagram. Yeah.
So many, this is actually a very interesting example. I was thinking about fast food. Depending on the time of day and the size of the restaurant, the order taker and delivery may be the same person, right? So you're really talking about a role where they
Yeah. So all of these have really been roles
Right.
up to this point in time, which is a key thing to remind ourselves that was the actor was described in terms of their role. And
the other two things about it is if they're two separate people, and I wonder if you guys talk about this a little bit. This is McDonald's at noon. If it's a Taco Bell at 4 o'clock in the morning, the collect money and provide the change is swapped with prepared food. And they actually collect the money after the food is made. So there's some interesting dependencies here that are not captured in this. It's really
I love the idea that these models might have a time of day associated with it.
Yeah, right.
And like based upon the time of day, I see different behaviors in this activity. And again, what you're mainly trying to do is you're trying to meditate on what's going on yourself. Here's the problem, right? The problem is we visit a workspace, we attend a meeting, and we take notes, and we listen to what people said, and we delude ourselves into thinking we have some degree of understanding. So a lot of times when people talk about aspects of software development, they're like, I want this to speed up. And I'm like, well, there's certain things I want you to slow down on. And the key one is this initial idea of, do I understand what I'm talking about before I go off and have the very expensive programmer start coding it like that. Which sounds ironic, given that people know from Menlo that we're Agilists, And a lot of people teach Agile is write nothing down in advance, just start coding, which I think is insane. But again, we created Menlo before the word Agile was coined. So we do the Menlo way. And the Menlo way is to understand to some degree what you're trying to build before you put all the sense of developers on it. So slowing down a little bit as the analyst and spending some time thinking about the system that you think you saw, and more importantly, sharing it with a buddy and then sharing it back with them for feedback is incredibly powerful. It's an incredibly powerful way to as opposed to I just attended a bunch of meetings and I took some pictures when I visited McDonald's to try to have a better conceptual understanding of what's really going on.
Could anybody make a argument for this not being agile? Has anybody been in an environment where if you tried to take the time to build set models like this, it would be truthfully said as an objection to get you back to the real work that this is not agile? I just have cartoon pictures of what,
It's said in
what that wacky figure.
it's said in most places. We have one, yes.
I'm not sure if I'm correctly understanding the question, but this is extremely similar to BPMN, which is used in business and is not considered agile, at least from that perspective.
And what did that acronym stand for? Business process?
Business process model matrix.
So
And so would it be true that in that environment, the doing of work would presuppose that business analysts did all of this kind of stuff already? And so this isn't agile because it shouldn't be part of the software development process, it's part of the business
I believe
process.
that's generally.
It's done during the spring.
I was gonna say my mom works for an automotive company, and honestly, say they won't say this is agile, they just don't care. They are very much a mindset that everyone has to be working all the time. So the moment a project gets started, programmers start programming. Before even the spot design, especially what they need is out, the programmers will have to start programming. So as since he's in usability, she'll go in and say, you know, it's like one medical student, it's like, well, try to make this look pretty, but you can't change anything because the programmer's been working on it, and we don't want to change anything.
that's probably the most common model out there right now. Just
And that, children, is why the screens in your cars are all shit.
it's why most of your tech.
Well, I will say, that apparently because of all the bailouts they do for automotive companies, they actually do have to go with government regulation for anything that involves the car. And so the company actually had to listen to her because the oversight committee basically said, this will kill people, you can't have this, it doesn't work.
Yes.
To the product. And
You generally, when you're going to kill people, you want to spend more time. I was responsible for QAing my first product, which could have killed people. And yeah, you ended up taking it fairly seriously. Not everybody does, even if it's going to kill you. Spend 5 minutes just making an activity diagram. Practice playing with those elements. I'm going to go back so you can see them. But make an activity diagram for some, maybe one of the activities that you saw on your in your use case diagram. I didn't want you to play one.
So we could do game player.
Remember this.
Freaking watching. You just do 2 swim lanes. And it starts with the game player logging in.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Well, they don't even have to do
So log in, start playing games, and then swim lane for viewers. There's a look for who's playing.
Well, I made, I think for this, basically, once you're consolidated did.
So
watching and or chatting and or
So donate, is there
well, yeah,
if you saw somebody.
well, you could
So it's basically there.
not really, but you can just their like subscriptions or big which you buy. Yeah, you buy and then you can sell it to them. So the streamers just get real money. So it's yeah, but you have to buy it. So it's essentially just a stupid layer of abstraction.
So as a, something you watch,
You buy some fake money, and then yeah, or you can subscribe, which is just directly steal money. Or you're subscribing to a channel, which you have all yeah, but also the subscription, so they get, well, following is when you're it's all down to the servers themselves. Like, a chat, when you're in the chat or channel. You can use Sort of like that. Well, it's integrated Discord does have integration.
Does anybody stream on
So explain your activity diagram to someone else in the room, whatever state it is, if you haven't already been working in pairs.
It's real time, but not everybody was and most people have a thing where in their broadcasting software it connects to Twitch. So like if somebody subscribes or donates, It's as the interaction as big so you can just ignore it and just block out what is your idea? Well, I mean, it's like another thing. You can be yourself or you can be
Most people form really strong opinions about everything without models, without any sort of model. They form political opinions without a solid economic model. They form system without a model about what the system's actually doing. I really think we should have this feature over this feature. They form models about everything, right? Or they form opinions about everything without having a model, right? What I'm trying to encourage you is that, man, there's a real win to building out some of these simple models. I'm not saying spend 3 years building models before you build the system, the anti-agile behavior. I am saying that when Tug showed up with it, now we had a fairly powerful team, but we showed up with a fairly powerful team, we kicked it out in 3 weeks.
Over Christmas.
Yeah, yeah, it was like what happens when VCs have money. And we did it.
To be fair, the client was in Tampa and that didn't.
Yeah. I'm going to Daytona tomorrow to teach a class, so it's always nice to do something in Florida this time of year. When you interview, you can use notations and build models. You interview to build a model of what's going on. You observe to build a model. You reflect to build a model. Catch yourself when you're just trying to form an opinion, and instead build out the model, the fundamental understanding of the system and what's going on, and reserve opinions, reserve judgment in terms of the goodness or badness, especially of something, and just try to observe it and record it. You'll have plenty of time for judgment later. You reflect using your notations, you discuss using your notations, and you repeat. When you go around and you take a picture and you visit a space, you have to pick. By the way, I often take pictures of places that I never even go back and look at the pictures because I've already reduced the 5 or 6 objects that I thought were interesting. But I still develop and maintain the habit of taking the picture and seeing the physical things that are there, what is in the space, what is occupying the space, and then making sure I capture them in my models. And the real win to these is captured best on this slide here, and it's some of the images that were in here. And what you see on this is the aftermath of the executive team playing with the models. Some of these are my scrolls. Most of them are their scrolls. These particular ones being especially controversial. We ruined at least one person's life probably by showing this diagram to the senior executive because they were doing something really fancy to close its sale and get their commission that the executive team did not want people doing because they lost visibility and accountability into the system when they did that. So I beautifully modeled the behavior I saw, and they're like, yeah, make sure in the future, I think this might be my note. Sheriff says no in the future. I think the executive said, I'm the sheriff, and I say no.
God rest his soul. That guy died.
Yes.
About a month after our engagement. The trauma of life, it was terrible. It wasn't our fault. It wasn't our fault. But he was given the choice as the executive. Do you want us to execute this as gardeners or as sheriffs? And he's sheriff. No question. So rather than cultivating this great idea that this one consultant had to help generate her own sales more and better, it was.
Yeah, our natural inclination would have been to study this more and understand it and to make it more fruitful in the future system. But, you know.
And the dead guy said, no, sure. not
Yes.
that.
Can I have one quick comment?
Yeah.
As an artifact, that top picture is not actually sight. So one thing that is really, really important.
Yeah,
You can
you're right.
barely make them to not make these big. If your instinct is to put them on a sheet, try to make them 20% larger because it makes it much easier to read and understand.
Yeah.
Stacy makes sense.
Printed out in a plotter and hauled by Dan all the way to Texas or
I have
Florida.
left giant diagrams like this in bathrooms and airports before, and that's not good. So check the tube, don't carry it on. And yeah, if this is as tall as Tom or taller, and you give somebody a big flat red marker and they're the boss, and you say, show us what's wrong. That is the best meeting they had that whole week.
Yeah.
They got to use their whole body, they got to get up, they got to perform a correction for their team. They got to look smart, we got to look dumb. It was great. The bigger the paper, easier on that.
And to me, the beauty of this is a common language that can represent the as-is system, can flow directly into the to-be system, can be captured by the software developers and architects as application programming interfaces, can manifest itself in the code, and can continue with this as a virtuous cycle in software development. And it's very powerful. And it's called object-oriented programming, object modeling. And it's still out there and it's still being used. And when it's used, it can save an awful lot of time and trouble. And it can help you get a much more profound insight into what you're doing. And that's my last slide. I did write a book this last year. It's none of which we talked about today, but I have to project it when I talk. Ceremony, a profound new method to achieve successful and sustainable change. I mention it because it's currently in beta. As an Agilist, I released the book before I released the book, which means you can still buy it for 99 cents and the price will go up tenfold sometime this year. I don't know when. It's also meant to be read in like an hour and a half. So if you find anything about Agile interesting or thinking about new ways of working, this is a book I wrote, and it's right now at least very cheap and a quick read. And I've been told by at least 2 senior executives who I've worked with that they think it's some of the most profound work I've ever done. Way more profound than what we did today. So that's my last pitch for Ceremony. Reach me at tom@tomwalash.com. Also Tom at Understanding Group, I think reaches me as well. And I'll stick around for questions, but I imagine someone's going to boot us out of the room.
No, because there's another class coming
Yeah.
in. So thank you, Tom. Our friends from the BBC need pushed forward by a week, so I've updated the spreadsheet and the files section on Canvas. Next week we can talk about how we'll start applying this. There's a folder in the files thing full of audio recordings that will be your group's focus. You will build these kinds of diagrams off of those recordings.